Thank you very much. I'm really honoured and delighted to be the first speaker at the first public meeting of Bright Blue. I'm told it's the Conservative compass. I think it's fantastic that you've got such. First of all, let's put to one side any sort of utopianism. Let's not bother with the angels on pins about exactly how equal or what's the perfect society or what would it look like, let's just look at where we are now and whether we think it's acceptable and which direction we should move. We are one of the most unequal countries amongst Western democracies. Most people think there is a limit to how unequal a country should be, and whether you're in the Conservative Party, Liberal Party, Labour Party, you may put that limit somewhere, but very few people have no limit. Very few people think it simply doesn't matter. British social attitudes for years now, and indeed many other polls, when they asked this question, British social attitudes have gone on asking this question. About 75% of people consistently say, so that shows it's right across the political spectrum, consistently say they think this country is too unequal and it's too unfair. When I talk about equality, I'm not going to bother defining exactly what you were saying about income. With income, I put status, housing, education, opportunity, everything that makes all the difference between the child that's born in a sink housing estate and the child that's born on the right side of the tracks and has every opportunity from a very good background. There's no doubt that it's still getting worse, which is depressing, because Labour has really tried pretty hard with tax credits. There's been quite a lot of redistribution. There have been a lot of social programmes. There's been a lot of progress in a lot of respects, I think. Things like Sure Start are the beginning of something that really could make a difference. It's not just about money, it's about using the money that's raised from taxes for programmes that work, and whether it's every child a reader, trying to make sure through private tuition that every single child reaches the age of 11 able to read and write properly. Those kinds of things are just as important as the straightforward redistribution of money in cash forms. We have to look back to the 1980s and remember what a cataclysmic time that was. If a bit of society broke off, that's when it broke off. At the end of the 70s, 1 in 7 children was born poor. By towards the end of the 80s, it was 1 in 3. And we've never recovered from that. It's dipped a little bit with Labour trying very hard with its child poverty programme, but hasn't dipped that much, about 500,000 fewer. But nevertheless, it's still around the 1 in 3 child, which is an appalling fact. And appalling that it's gone. There are most of us who've been taught social history, history you did at school, was a history of progress. Well, progress went into reverse at that point, and we haven't managed to turn it around the other way. From the beginning of the last century, there was a straightforward story to the end of the 70s of gradually advancing equality, greater equality. Why does it matter? Because all political parties say they want social mobility. They want every child to have the same opportunity. We all know that's completely impossible in a society where some children are going to come from backgrounds so much better than others. It is entirely impossible to have social mobility or only the occasional freak case, which becomes, the wonder story, the winner of the X Factor, or its equivalent in other occupations. We've only had to look at Alan Milburn's report the other day to see how many of the top professions are utterly dominated by people who came from very good backgrounds. Every party says, I want, 2 children from 2 different backgrounds to have the same opportunity. You cannot do that, or at least no society on earth has ever done it, without first of all being a more equal society. Unless the parents are joining in society reasonably at similar levels, their children will have a very different fate ahead of them. The two things are indissoluble. Blair always thought you could have one without the other, and now Cameron thinks you can have one without the other. Forget about the Gini coefficients and the measurements of that sort. Just go for putting it all on education. Well, education cannot do the heavy lifting of the sort of dysfunction that we have in society at the moment. If you want to really know why it matters and how it works, this is the book to read. This is the book that Cameron quoted and then misused the research very badly. But nevertheless, in this book, it will tell you The Spirit Level by Wilkinson and Pickett, full of wonderful graphs. It shows absolutely, without a shadow of doubt, as Cameron himself said in his Hugo Young lecture, that the countries that have the worst social dysfunction, crime, mental health, drugs, teenage pregnancy, alcohol, are all the countries with the greatest disparity of incomes. You can draw the line straight the way through and plot on a graph pretty much from America as the worst, and us a bit behind for all of those social dysfunctions, the Nordics and one or two other countries at the other end for being the most orderly, most peaceful, most satisfactory societies in lots of ways. Somewhere around in the middle you'll find the sort of France and Germany's, but we are, amongst the worst, and the correlation between equality and all of those dysfunctions is so strong that I really find it when you read that book and say it ain't so. And Cameron certainly didn't. He simply said, but, I don't think we have to get the top and bottom closer, we just need to get the bottom closer to the middle, which is pretty much what Blair thought too, leave the top alone. This absolutely disproves, there never has been a society that is that shaped, where the top soars out of all control and the bottom gets up to the middle. It's just exceedingly unlikely to the point of impossible. I think what this book shows too, that these are all similar Western democracies they're talking about, that there is nothing inevitable. There is one of the Thatcher legacies, I think, there she is, was that there is no alternative, Tina. That there are these huge economic factors, forces, that predestine us in certain directions, and that inequality is one of those terrible forces that we just have to somehow cope with as best we can and tinker around the edges, see people at the bottom not left too far behind. It just isn't so. These are political choices that have been made over decades that make these countries different from one another. And actually, the ones that are most equal are also the ones that have been traditionally the most economically successful. It's not true of all of the countries, but it certainly is true of the ones that are most equal, which are the Nordics. And so those are conscious decisions they've made over many years to have high tax rates, high redistribution, high social services, and make sure that nobody really is left behind, so that the hospital cleaner and the hospital consultant will live lives not all that different, in an area not that different, will drive cars that are not that different, kids will go to more or less the same schools, they'll have roughly the same holidays. They're not living in utterly different societies in the way that, frankly, we are here between, Kensington and the East End. If you want an unequal society, you have to face up to the fact that it will have these broken bits in it. And you can't say we'll fix the broken bits, but we won't fix the underlying problems. Now, the mechanisms are really about status and esteem. I'll stop it just a minute. It's a wonderful piece of research in here is about macaque monkeys. Taking them on an experiment in a zoo where you take the high status monkeys out of a cage, out of the cage, and you put them in another cage where they become low status monkeys, and the other way around. Within a very short period of time, within under 2 years, the high status monkeys that have been extremely healthy, powerful and strong become depressed, get a lot of the diseases of poverty, get heart attacks and arteriosclerosis, the diseases that are associated with being low status. Status makes you sick and depressed. It matters more than almost anything else. Why are kids in gun crime gangs? Because they're wanting respect, and respect is what you don't get if you're at the bottom of a society with a huge gap in it. So that is the sort of transmission mechanism between more equal and less unequal societies, and why those at the bottom of unequal societies fare so badly. It's not just a question of them looking at the bankers at the top. It's that school child who goes to school on her first day of school from a very poor background, looks around the classroom, and other people have all sorts of things that she doesn't have. They have the perfect lunchbox, the perfect trainers, the perfect everything. They're talking about what holiday they went on. It's that sort of difference that a child clocks immediately at the age of 5. They despair, they give up, they fall behind, they haven't got the encouragement from home anyway. And this difference of income itself matters a great deal, as well as all of the other differences that we know come from generations of poverty. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Polly.